question. We now move on to the first statement. The Minister hasn't got to go far to swap over. We have the statement following the earthquake in Myanmar, and I call the Minister Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The heartbreaking scenes from Myanmar and Thailand over the weekend have shocked the world. I'm sure I speak for those across the House in expressing our sincere condolences to all those affected by this terrible tragedy. This devastating earthquake has only added to the plight of people in Myanmar, who are already facing extreme vulnerability and hardship. Over 3,000 people have died, and this is likely to increase significantly in the days ahead. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the first responders in Myanmar, as well as the humanitarian and civil society partners, working tirelessly in extremely difficult conditions to assess the scale of destruction and providing life-saving support. I also want to put on record from this House our thanks to our own team in Yangon. I also want to express the UK's continued solidarity and support for the people of Myanmar as they face yet more hardship. Madam Deputy Speaker, within the first half hour of the earthquake on Friday, the UK released inbuilt contingency funding to our humanitarian partners in Myanmar. And on Saturday, my Right Honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary and the Minister for Development announced a further £10 million of life-saving support. This will be delivered to UK-funded local partners already mobilised to provide a humanitarian response on the ground because of the ongoing conflict. It will bolster their efforts, including in the areas hardest hit by the earthquake, where they will help provide the most vulnerable with food, water supplies, medicine and shelter, regardless of their location. I want to assure the House that these funds will not be used to benefit the current Myanmar military regime or individuals and entities sanctioned by the UK. Instead, it will be directed to partners with whom we have a trusted and long-standing working relationship, with a strong record of delivering assistance in an extremely challenging operating environment across Myanmar. Our priority is to help the most vulnerable in all areas affected by this disaster, including those who are outside the control of the military regime. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK is also supporting the emergency response through other global funds which we consistently rank as one of the top donors every year. For example, the $5 million from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, $2 million from the Access to Health Fund, and these funds will support emergency health response efforts focused on first aid and trauma care for the affected population. In conclusion, our combined support demonstrates the UK's continuing commitment to supporting the people of Myanmar. Despite the earthquake, we've seen reports of ongoing airstrikes against civilian targets. Such attacks have had the devastating consequences on local communities over the last 4 years, and we condemn all attacks which target civilians and civilian infrastructure, including schools and hospitals. We welcome existing ceasefires and call on all parties to the conflict to give emergency responders and humanitarian partners full, unhindered and safe access to those affected. And we recognise the earthquakes also had significant impact in Thailand and have expressed our deepest condolences to the Government of Thailand and families of those who have lost loved ones. We provided consular support to British nationals who were affected, and I'm relieved to update the House that our high-achieving team in Bangkok continues to function as normal. We stand with the people of Myanmar and Thailand at this challenging time, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Minister for advance sight of her statement. As the Minister has rightly said, the thoughts of the whole House are with those affected by this terrible earthquake affecting Myanmar, Thailand and the wider region. It is a tragedy that over 3,000 people have already been confirmed dead and many more are injured, and that so many still remain missing, leaving families gripped by anxiety as they await news of their loved ones. They're foremost in our minds, and I join the Minister in expressing condolences to those affected. The images of rescuers searching through rubble, digging with their own bare hands, are deeply moving. We hope and pray that more survivors are found. And we hope that effective recovery and stability operations can take place as quickly as possible. We understand, as the Minister has said, the government has committed a £10 million humanitarian package for Myanmar in light of this awful earthquake, and that this aid is being delivered through trusted partners, and she's mentioned some of those already. Can she give any details of the aid partners the UK is working with? The Minister has explained that this package will provide food, water, supplies, medicine and shelter, and quite rightly. Can she give further details of the quantities and the types of foods and medicines being provided and who they're being provided by? The statement also refers to the release of an inbuilt contingency fund for partners already in the country. Can the Minister confirm how much this is worth? And is this on top of the $10 million that has been announced, and what will it be used for? Can she give details of how multilateral funding is being spent in response to this earthquake? And can she comment on any contingency planning taking place for responding to any further serious aftershocks? And is there sufficient arrangements to get aid over the border into Myanmar? And given, as the Minister has already said, that Myanmar is controlled by a military dictatorship, what safeguards are in place to ensure that British aid reaches those in genuine need? And whether she assesses that deconflictation will be possible to shield humanitarian efforts from military action, based on the reports that we've already heard and that she's mentioned around Myanmar's military have been striking civilian areas, despite the obvious need for focus on the humanitarian relief. What is the government's assessment of those reports? And if indeed they are accurate, how does the British government intend to respond? Moreover, does the Minister believe that the fallout from the earthquake will affect the humanitarian situation for the Rohingya refugees, and what specific assessment has been made of their needs in light of this terrible tragedy? Will any of the $10 million that's been announced go towards support for the Rohingya, or will there be an adaptation in existing programmes to support the Rohingya? Can she also update the House on whether any of the $10 million is earmarked for Thailand, or whether there is a separate package of support for Thailand? And it would be helpful for the House to understand whether formal requests for assistance have been received from any of the countries affected by the earthquake and the UK's official response, as well as whether any discussions ministers have had with counterparts affected in countries. Madam Deputy Speaker, we will of course also look to the UK Government to provide all the necessary support for British nationals who are affected in the region, and that's crucial. We know that Thailand is a popular holiday destination, and she's mentioned already some of the consular assistance that is taking place in particular. And finally, we've seen various activity in social media about how the government is ensuring that messaging is being targeted, but can she provide any specifics on the nature of the support that FCDO consular teams are able to provide to British nationals in the region?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her shared concern about this earthquake and for her many points of detail. Specifically on the £10 million, that's obviously on top of the current allocation, and Myanmar is one of the parts of the region which receives the largest ODA funding due to the conflict there. So this is an extra £10 million. The aftershocks which she has mentioned, currently we are awaiting more news, it being only 3.5 days since the initial earthquake, but the assessment is, given the shallow nature of it, we think that the aftershock in Bangkok is currently the worst that we have heard, but I will update her should I hear more on that. In relation to safeguarding the aid, she makes a very important point that it would be very easy for the military regime to divert the aid away from the front line, and that is where the experience of our excellent staff on the ground plays such an important role, because we have such tried and tested methods of working through grassroots organisations to provide aid into the centre of Myanmar, into that region of Mandalay and around there. So we have very trusted ways of providing that without being concerned that some of that aid may be diverted into the military. She's also asked about the Rohingya, and that is being seen separately. We are going to be working a little bit later in the year on more support for the Rohingya, and we certainly know that it is in the long-term settlement of the Myanmar question that the Rohingya will hopefully be able to return to their part of Myanmar over the long term. But right now, the immediate support that the government is able to provide is very much on assisting with central Myanmar. But I can reassure her that we have got a different strategy for the Rohingya, which I can write to her about. On the question of Thailand and the separate package for Thailand, currently the assessment is that both the consular team have no extra concerns regarding people coming across the border, that our consular team is working as usual, and that our excellent ambassador there has given us reassurances that the team in Bangkok are operating as usual. In terms of our counterparts, due to the long-standing nature of the development work in Myanmar, we work very closely with colleagues across the region who are helpful in Myanmar. Obviously, it is a very complex and there are many hard-to-reach areas, and so we work very closely with some EU partners, some partners in the region who, of course, have come to the aid of those suffering in this earthquake. But just to quote a couple, Singapore, India and other neighbouring countries. The other question she's asked me is about the British consular assistance, and we currently have an update that there are no concerns regarding missing British travellers either in Myanmar or in Thailand, but I can continue to update her on that should that change.
Luke Akehurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The terrible loss of life and destruction caused by the earthquake in Myanmar is just heaping further suffering on the people of that country who are enduring a violent, repressive military regime and a brutal civil war. Does the Minister share my horror that Myanmar's military regime is continuing airstrikes and ground attacks even during this humanitarian disaster? And what possibility is there of humanitarian aid reaching non-government controlled areas in the periphery of the country?
I thank my right honourable friend for his work with the Burma campaign over the years and for his question today. And we have heard the reports of airstrikes after the earthquake, and we are looking into this with our partners. The UK has consistently called on the military to cease its targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure, including schools and hospitals, and we fully condemn those attacks. The military must immediately cease attacks on the civilian population, including humanitarian personnel. All parties to the conflict must ensure full, unhindered humanitarian access to the most vulnerable and the safety of those facilitating it.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I share the grief expressed by the whole House for the people of Myanmar. It is heartbreaking that a country which has already suffered 4 years of brutal civil war now faces further devastation. I wholeheartedly welcome the government's announcement of £10 million to support the emergency response. It is vital that these funds reach those most severely impacted by this disaster as quickly as possible. Can the Minister confirm how much funding has been dispensed so far and outline the steps her department is taking to translate funds into life-saving aid as quickly as possible? As the death toll continues to rise and the ultimate scale of the disaster becomes clearer, will the Minister confirm that the Government will continue to increase our humanitarian support to match the needs on the ground? In the spring statement, we saw that the UK's development spending faces a cliff edge in 2026, with almost £5 billion in cuts anticipated by that time. This will reduce the UK's ability to respond to disasters and provide the kind of long-term consistent support that rebuilding Myanmar and its economy will require. Can the Minister confirm that bilateral aid to Myanmar will remain a priority? The military junta in Myanmar has long blocked aid access for civilians in opposition-controlled areas. Aid workers have been attacked. And now we are hearing reports that aid workers responding to the earthquake fear junta arrest and interference. So what is the government doing to ensure that humanitarian aid is getting through and that responders on the ground can work free of repression? And can the Minister also outline the government's diplomatic response to the wider conflict and response to what the UN are calling reports of human rights violations? Myanmar needs our support in the aftermath of this tragedy, and as the world spotlight turns to it, I urge the government to take this opportunity to use every lever it can to push for an end to conflict and a future democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The specific question on how much of the $10 million has been spent, it's only just been allocated within the 48 hours, so it's still very much building on that firm base that we already have, which has been a very solid donor country. We've been a donor country to Myanmar for many years, and therefore we're building on a very solid base. But the 10 million will be spent rapidly on those emergency responses. She's asked about the question of the UK ODA cuts on any response to the earthquake. And we know that the 10 million extra, which the Foreign Secretary has announced, of course, is on top of the original allocations. And she's worried about the impact in the future, given that we have announced that the gross national income on ODA will drop to 0.3%. What I can confirm is that the Minister for Development set out to the International Development Committee the initial bilateral ODA allocations for 25-26 are set at the level of live contractual agreements with partners. So unlike in the previous reduction of aid, where there were in-year reductions and programs stopped from one day to the next, that is not how this government will look at the aid budget. The Minister for Development will lay out to Parliament how she intends to do the comprehensive spending review post-25-26 and how she will bring that down to 0.3. But how that relates to the funding question of the earthquake is immaterial because of the extra 10 million, which we will continue to monitor. And should we need to top that up, we could. But at the moment, the assessment is that that is about right, given how many different partners there are coming forward.
Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our hearts go out to all those affected and tragic loss of life in Myanmar and devastation also in Thailand. The Disaster Emergency Committee are saying they're monitoring the situation. In previous tragedies of this scale, they have launched an appeal and they are considering that. What discussions has the Minister had with the Disaster Emergency Committee and its 15 leading groups on their ability to operate in Myanmar, whether they'll launch a committee and whether, if they do, the UK government will utilise UK aid match to match the generosity, which I'm sure the British public will show, to ensure that as much money as possible can reach the front line in Myanmar and Thailand?
I thank my honourable friend for this question and for his knowledge of these areas of policy. And I ask him to allow 4 or 5 days so that the various international partners which make up the Disaster Emergency Committee have time to deliberate. But as he is aware, we have a very generous civil society in the UK, and as soon as there is information to bring forward on that, we will make that a statement public.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for her statement to the House today. For those of us who've been closely involved on issues to do with Burma, Myanmar now for decades, the severity of the disaster is shown by the fact that, unusually, the regime has called for international support. But it's a mark of the barbarity of this illegal and corrupt junta that they have conducted 11 airstrikes after the earthquake took place against their own people, which is undoubtedly a war crime. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have a long history of engagement with Burma. 6.3 million children are absolutely dependent on assistance. It's going to be very difficult to sustain the necessary level of support in future following these dreadful Labour cuts to the International Development Programme. Can the Minister tell us what discussions she has had with her American counterparts to make sure that we try and drive the money that we're both putting forward as much as possible so that we get greater value for money as a result of that joint spending?
I thank him for his contribution and for the Honourable Gentleman's knowledge of Myanmar and Burma and the situation which he is very familiar with. And I couldn't agree more with him with his description of the Tatmadaw and the approach that they have taken over the years, absolutely ruthless and brutal to their own people. He talks about the children who are affected, and he will be aware that there's between 4 and 5 million children who are out of school. This is before the earthquake, so there is that very strong sense that this could not have happened to a more vulnerable country right now in the region. He asks about the role of the USA, and as he is aware, USAID has been paused internationally, but I was delighted to see that on the weekend the US government has said that it will contribute £2 million immediately, and we will seek to work with US partners who of course know the area as well, so that we can work together and join our efforts up.
Mark Garnier.
Thank you very much. Can I associate with the words the Minister has said about what's going on in Myanmar and Thailand? But in my role as Prime Minister's Trade Envoy, former Prime Minister's Trade Envoy to Thailand and Myanmar, I've had an opportunity to see the extraordinary work that British businesses are doing in both those countries. Now, I fully understand that in Thailand, the British mission there is supporting all the businesses as it has done for many, many years. But obviously in Myanmar, the situation is far more complicated. Yet there are still a number of British businesses, from big conglomerates down to entrepreneurs trying to cut a furrow in that country. Those businesses employ Burmese nationals who otherwise would be starving given the complex political situation there. So can I urge the Minister to work with the Department of Business and Trade to see if there could be support for those British businesses in Yangon and around Yangon that otherwise aren't being supported because of that situation with the junta?
Well, could I thank the Honourable Gentleman for all of his work on behalf of the government in terms of understanding the trade picture, getting to know the businesses, and he is right to say that there are a number of businesses where it is safe to undertake business activity, and they have supported the workforce through thick and thin, where there is the best practice in business, not just, of course, in Myanmar, but also in Bangladesh, which is going through a difficult time, but also in Thailand. And I will certainly take back his message of support through our missions there, both in Yangon and in Bangkok, so that all our partners there can be aware of the support that we have here in the House for that ongoing work.
His statement today that this is so much more than a humanitarian crisis. This is a double disaster, a humanitarian crisis on the back of civil war, on the back of further military attacks on the domestic population of Myanmar. Given the United States' withdrawal of US aid, and also with the withdrawal of Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, can I ask the Minister what is being done to support the BBC World Service's Burmese service in this particular environment, where information is going to be absolutely vital to the maintenance of service and the saving of lives?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that suggestion, and he is correct to say that USAID has been frozen, but it is encouraging to see over the weekend an announcement by the US government that $2 million immediately will be put towards this dreadful earthquake. So that's a hopeful sign that we can work together on this emergency. On the BBC World Service, he is quite right to say often it's the radio which is the last thing that people can hear, and it gives them so much hope. So with his permission, I will write back specifically with the exact position on BBC World Service in Myanmar for him.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I know there will be many, many compassionate people across West Worcestershire and the whole of the United Kingdom who will be wanting to know what they can do to help out in this situation. So will she give us some further information about how UK taxpayers can donate and whether there will be an aid match at all?
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her suggestions, and she's quite right to say there are so many people who will be thinking, how can I do my bit for the people of Myanmar? And as I mentioned to the member for Leeds, that as soon as the the DEC comes forward, which is the joint appeal across all of the different bodies, which will be within the week, because of course this happened just on Thursday night, Friday, there will be details available. And it is very careful that I would like to say from the dispatch box that the DEC is a proper brand that can be trusted by our constituents, because it's very important that we don't have people just giving money online or through Facebook or whatever if they're not sure of that. So we will work very carefully as soon as the announcement is ready to make with international partners about where those donations can go.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for her statement and also for her compassionate words. Encapsulates, I believe, the opinion of us all in this chamber in relation to where we are. The major earthquake in Myanmar has caused over 2,000 deaths and caused the collapse of numerous high-rise buildings, of temples, of houses, destroying families and livelihoods and dispersing families in all directions. So what discussion has the Minister had with counterparts or officials in relation to ensuring that all is done to get children to a place of safety with the necessary aid, and that any children who are displaced, efforts will be made to relocate them to their families as soon as is humanly possible, and indeed with all urgency? Thanks so much.
Thank the honourable member for his usual compassion for children caught up in this, and I can reassure him that as it was the holidays, school holidays, fortunately children were not in school, so that where the earthquake affected schools, the children were not there, which is a huge relief. Obviously, in other senses, certain places of religious belief were actually affected by the earthquake. We don't have an exact picture yet, but what we do know is that the work that the UK has done over the years with the 4 to 5 million children, whether it's through vaccinations and health or whether it's through our education programs, working at grassroots level, we have a very good and trusted way of working at grassroots level to get to the hardest reach families, to serve them and to ensure that they have life-saving aid.
Andrew Murison.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Use of its Kremlin-backed military during a humanitarian crisis to attack its own people is a complete obscenity. Has the Minister called in the Myanmar ambassador so that he can offer an explanation?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that suggestion, and I, with him and the whole House, condemn the actions of the Tatmadaw. Currently, I'm sure he's aware there is no ambassador as such, but a chargé, and we don't have formal relations with the chargé, but he has said it, and I agree with him, and from this House the message is very clear.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Can the Minister just explain a bit more about the mechanism by which any aid donated in this country reaches people on the ground in Myanmar, particularly because of the airstrikes we've heard about? It's hard to imagine how such aid would get to those areas that are currently under attack by the regime.
I thank the honourable member for raising this, and to be 100% clear, the usual procedure is for the Disaster Emergency Committee, which is made up of governments plus large NGOs and United Nations agencies, and they arrange a particular mechanism for giving safe donations, because we know that if people give donations to different groups, they may not be going to the right place. So as soon as we have that information, and that will be within the week of this happening, we will be able to provide that. But it does require the coordination across a number of governments, plus the UN agencies, plus the faith groups and all the other groups. So as soon as that's ready, we will let him have the details. Thank you.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The earthquake in Myanmar could not come at a worse time, with millions already displaced and needing humanitarian assistance as a result of the ongoing civil war since the military coup in 2021. I welcome the Minister's condemnation of the multiple airstrikes that have taken place since the earthquake and the 10 million of assistance that have been announced. However, numerous charities have come forward for emergency appeals to support the affected, and I've heard some warm words about how we can build on that. So I wonder, will the UK Government support these appeals, as mentioned earlier by others across this House, which means we're commonly speaking with one voice, through Aid Match, so that for every pound donated by members of the public, the Government will also contribute a further £1 of UK aid?
I can confirm that that suggestion is under active consideration.
That concludes the statement on Myanmar and the earthquake.